Hello, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about a popular topic in the media, wealth inequality. So there's a lot of claims that wealth inequality is getting worse, it's causing a lot of adverse effects, and we're just going to be looking at the data today to see if that supports the claims. So we'll be looking at, is it getting worse, is it getting better, which countries are most affected, what are the causes of wealth inequality, and lastly, what are the effects of wealth inequality? So to do this, we're going to pull data from a bunch of different sources, just as the World Bank, different government data, and just different sources around the internet. So to analyze this data, first we're going to pull all the data into Excel spreadsheets, do a bit of cleaning in there, then use Power Query to transform this data, visualize it in Power BI, and do our final presentation in Microsoft PowerPoint. So I hope you enjoy the presentation, and without further ado, let's get started. So as you recall, we're going to be looking at wealth inequality over time. Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? We're going to be looking at the causes. So one of the causes that has been brought up is the effects of globalization. So we're going to be looking at countries where the GDP, exports of GDP has expanding over time and seeing if that is affecting wealth inequality. And we're also going to be looking at the effects. So one of the effects that has been talked about is an increase in crime. So as wealth inequality gets worse and worse, crime goes up. So we're going to be looking at the homicide rate for different countries. So to figure out these questions, the first thing we're going to have to do is find reliable data. So to find the world inequality rate, I have gone to the World Inequality Database. And from here, we're going to pull out the indicators that we want to look at. So what we want to look at here is the wealth inequality for the top 10% and how much share of the wealth do they own. And the countries we're going to be looking at are listed here. And we're simply just going to retrieve this data into Excel. The next data we're going to look at is the export of goods, and this will answer our question, is globalization having an effect on wealth inequality? So from the World Bank, we're going to go into the data bank here, and we're just going to pick the fields that we want to see. For time, we're just going to look at from 1990 onwards. And from here, we're just going to download into Excel as well. And lastly, we're going to be looking at the effects of wealth inequality. So we're going to be looking at crime rates, specifically homicide per 100,000 people. So again, we'll go into the data bank here, and this is from the World Bank as well. From here, we're going to select the time. And for this, we're just going to pull the most recent data because we're just going to do a country-to-country comparison. And we'll export this to Excel. So now that we have all the data that we need, we can start to transform this data and do some data cleansing. So to do that, we're going to save this file and we're going to open up Power BI. So within Power BI, we're going to get the data we need. So we'll click on Get Data, search for the file that we need within an Excel workbook, and pull the data tables that we need. So percent of GDP as exports, the wealth owned by the top 10%, and the homicide rate. And from here, we'll transform data. So as you can see, this opens up Power Query, and we'll look at the homicide rate here. The data looks good here, so we'll start to look at percent of wealth as the top percent. So here we can see we have a lot of null values, and the data isn't really in a format that we want. The titles are all weird, so we will start with editing these titles. So this is just going to be USA. So now that we've renamed the titles, we're going to get rid of these null values, and we're going to pivot this data into a more usable form. So to do that, we're going to select the first two columns, right click, and click on Unpivot Other Columns. So as you can see, this has removed all the null values and put it into a more usable form. We're going to rename this here to countries. As well, for this table here, we're going to unpivot the data. And we're going to just change these values here to percentage. Okay, and now that we have the data ready to go, we're just going to close and apply. And from here, we can start to visualize. So now that we've cleaned and transformed our data, we can start to look at visuals and start to look for key indicators, trends, and just any key insights that we can find. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use our slicer here to select the years that we want to analyze. And we'll start with 1990 to 2015. So first, let's see, has wealth inequality increased over the years? So from here, we can see 1990 to 2015. And this is the percent of wealth owned by the top 10% per year. So in 1990, it was 50%, and by 2015, it's gone up to 75%, nearly a 25% increase. So let's also look at it by country, just to make sure there's no anomalies. So by looking at it by country, we can see an upward trend of pretty much all the countries except for South Africa, which was already pretty high and stayed roughly about the same at just above 80%. Whereas every other country, we can see these upward trends, and the average of all these is around 20 to 25% as well. So next we want to look at what is the cause, what's one of the causes at least of income inequality. And a common theory of that is when a country starts to import more goods and starts to outsource their labor. And to do that, we start to look at the GDP as imports. So as you can see by this graph here, that over the years, the percent of imports that a country has compared to their GDP has increased by nearly 10%. And we'll look at it by country. And we can see as well that this has been gradually increasing for each country as well. So overall, you can see that as percent of GDP of imports has gone up, so has the percent of wealth owned by the top 10%. So in conclusion, global inequality is increasing worldwide. It's caused by many factors. There's globalization, there's technology, lack of education for lower class citizens. And this is causing a lot of effects. So this is causing health effects within our society. It's causing a decrease in social cohesion, increases in time. And eventually this is going to slow our economic growth. It's going to slow our economic growth because there'll be less incentives for entrepreneurs there'll be less incentive for entrepreneurs and creative people to create because there just won't be that money as it's going to the top 10%. So as you can see, this is a big effect on countries worldwide. And to combat this, government needs to start looking at policies to help income inequalities, help start small businesses, and any other policy that they can to help lift people out of poverty.